In the previous part of discussion, we explained what we mean by lifespan, then different types of especially asexual reproduction, and in this part we have to discuss the sexual reproduction and phases of life cycle and events of sexual reproduction. Almost all, even in second, third and fourth chapter of first unit, we have to discuss in detail sexual reproduction only. That means now onwards all the information in second PU biology with respect to the sexual reproduction only. Then what do we mean by sexual reproduction? That is, the meaning of sex means it is separate. That means here two separate organisms involved in reproduction. Hence it is called sexual reproduction. Or two separate sex organs are involved in reproduction, or two different or separate sex cells are involved in reproduction. Hence the word what we called the sexual reproduction. For example, two separate sexes or organisms are involved means male parent, female parent, mother, father. Like that, two separate sex organs are involved means in lower plants the antheridium, male sex organ, archegonium, female sex organ. Higher plants, androecium and gynoecium. Androecium is a male reproductive organ, gynoecium is a female reproductive organ. When we come across animals, the ovaries and testes. Like that, two different or separate sex cells are involved in sexual reproduction. That means, once again, the male sex cell we called sperm or spermatozoon or male gamete. The female sex cell is egg, ovum or ova we called, or female gamete. Therefore, a sexual reproduction, now we can define what? By the fusion of two gametes, that is male gamete, sperm, female gamete, egg. There is a production of young one, therefore it is what we call the name sexual reproduction. Production of a young one by the fusion of a male and female gametes. Hence, when you take the characters of mainly a sexually reproducing organism, where all the especially a sexually reproducing organisms are generally biparental, means two parents are involved in sexual reproduction, very rarely uniparental. Then second one, here there is a production of gametes. Gametes we also called sex cells or germ cells. Once again, the male and female gametes fuse to form young one. Gamete refers to fusion or marriage. On that base, word we used gametes. Sex cell means these are the separate cell. For example, in male organism, one separate cell is there. That what we call the name, the male gamete or sperm. Like that, in case of a female organism, there is a presence of a special separate cell that is called egg. Therefore, it we call sex cell. Then the sex cell or gamete we also call germ cell, because the cell fuse to form or germinate to form young one, hence it is called sex cell or germ cell. Then during sexual reproduction, both mitosis and meiosis involved for production of the especially a gametes. Then at the same time there is one special process we have, gametogenesis. Formation of gametes is a common characteristic feature of sexual reproduction. Then if you take sexual reproduction, compulsory there is a union of egg and sperm, and one most basic process of sexual reproduction is fertilization, that is take place, that we also call the name syngamy. Then most important thing is that here two different organisms genetic material is actually fuse, hence there is a chance of genetic recombination, and there is a arise of a variations, and these variations helps for evolution. Therefore always we say variations are food of evolution, we say. Then it is germinal, that means the reproduction, sexual reproduction is germinal because it germinate to produce young one, because germ cells are involved in sexual reproduction. And compared to asexual reproduction, in sexual reproduction there is a less young ones are formed, and the process is more complex. These are all a characteristic feature of sexually reproducing organism. Either you may take plants or animals. If you consider difference between sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction, generally sexual reproduction in most of the cases it is biparental, sometimes uniparental. But asexual reproduction always it is uniparental. That means during sexual reproduction both mother and father, male partner and female partner is involved. Very rarely uniparentals we see. Whereas asexual reproduction, single parent have ability to what? Reproduce. There is no differentiation of mother and father or male parent and female parent. Second one, sexual reproduction is generally germinal and it is a somatic. That means here germinal cells involved in the sexual reproduction. That is egg and sperm involved in the sexual reproduction. Or in other words, gametes involved in the sexual reproduction. But in this case, somatic cells, we know except egg or sperm in organism body, rest of all cells we call somatic cells, or we say vegetative cell. Vegetative cell or somatic cell directly gives the young one, therefore it is somatic. Then here there is the existence of gamete formation, that process what we call gametogenesis. But in case of asexual reproduction, no need of gametes, gametogenesis is absent. Then during sexual reproduction, union of egg and sperm is take place, that process we call fertilization or syngamy, that is absent in case of a asexual reproduction. No fertilization in case of the asexual reproduction. Then at the same time here gametes involved, or we say sex cells involved in the reproduction, but in this case no sex cells or gametes at all. Then there is a chance of genetic recombination. Why there is an existence of genetic recombination? Because here two organisms genetic material is involved, but in this case no chance of what genetic recombination. If genetic recombination is generally not there, once again one more linked point is there. Here there is a development of new changes that whatever the modification we seen in young one, we call it as a variations. These variations are developed in case of sexually reproducing organisms, whereas no variations in case of asexual reproduction. Therefore, they have greater importance of the evolution as well as to adjust the nature we call adaptability is more in case of a sexually reproducing organisms. But here no adaptation as well as no evolutionary importance during asexual reproduction. And the organisms which developed by sexual reproduction generally genetically and morphologically they are different. But here the genetically and morphologically same, they are popularly known as a clones. Then most important one here, the number of young one produced generally less, whereas in sexual reproduction young one production is more. And most important thing you have to analyze the sexual and asexual reproduction, it is more complex, whereas it is less complex. In such a way, in depth, we can analyze the difference between sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Now, we have to discuss phases of life cycle. That means phases in a organisms who reproduce sexually. First one, juvenile phase. Second one, reproductive phase. Or that we also call maturation phase. Then third one, aging, or that we also call senescence, or aging we called. If you take a juvenile phase, it is period between young one to maturation. That period we called the specially a juvenile phase. For example, in case of human beings, mainly in case of girls, the young one to maturity means 13 to 14 years, where there is onset of menstrual cycle. That process, what we call the name maturation, the juvenile phase will be, we consider. Whereas in case of boys, it may be up to 16 to 18 years like that. Then in different plants, by onset of flowering itself, we consider it as a maturation phase or reproductive phase. Before that phase, we also called it as the especially juvenile phase. In case of plants, that we also referred as a vegetative phase also, or where the vegetative part is there, no flower bearing capacity. Therefore, that phase we also call vegetative phase, and this phase is not fixed. It shows the especially a lot of variation. That means it varies from species to species. Every species has a particular juvenile phase period. Whereas next you take, that is a reproductive phase, that we also called the maturation phase. Here what happens, the sex organs are well developed. We know sex organs, we used different term at different levels of the organisms. For example, in lower plants, the male sex organ we called antheridium. Female sex organ archegonium. They develops during what? Reproduction phase. Whereas in higher plants, the male sex organ we called androecium, mainly in flowering plants. Gynoecium in case of what? The flowering plants as a female reproductive part. Whereas in animals, the sex organs we used ovaries, female sex organs, testis, the male sex organs. These sex organs will be developed at the maturation phase. At the same time, there is a development of the especially gametes by a process what we call gametogenesis. That process what we call the name gametogenesis. Then during the reproductive phase, in case of plant, there is a different flowering pattern we see. That means some plants bears flowers seasonally. For example, most of the flowering plants bears their flower in rainy season. But these seasonally flowering plants, we make continuous flowering capacity by using a hormones, that is a phytohormones, namely one most important one we use auxins for the flowering purpose, another one gibberellins, popularly we known as a gibberellic acids. But there are certain plants are there, they shows unusual flowering. For example, you take bamboo. It bears flowers once in a life after 50 years. Bamboo bears flowers once in a life after 50 years. One more, a very special example, Strobelianthus kuntiana. We called Neela Kurunchi. It bears flowers every 12 years once, mainly in the month of September and October. I think last year 2006 and 2018 they bears flowers, and this specialized plant we see in the hilly areas of Karnataka, Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And they bear very specialized violet color flowers and even attract the tourist. It's a slide showing Strobelianthus kuntiana, we call Neela Kurunchi. It bears flowers every 12 years once. Mainly it is found in hilly areas of Karnataka, Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And this a specialized a flowering plant has ability to attract a tourist because of its violet color flowers. These are what we call Neela Kurunchi or Strobelianthus Kuntiana. Tropilanthes kuntiana. Even in case of animals also, during reproductive phase, they have a particular reproductive season. We call it as a breeding season. For example, you take that is the especially birds and reptiles. They generally reproduce during summer. Whereas we take fishes and amphibians, mainly we can say the frogs, in the rainy season they reproduce. Like that, if you consider the goats, sheep, dog, they reproduce mainly winter season. Here also, these animals selected favorable season for fertilization, their young one development, and even their nourishment. It takes place under favorable condition. For birds and reptiles, more temperature or humidity is needed for incubation. Hence, they selected what? Summer as a best season for reproduction. Whereas fishes and amphibians need plenty of water for their reproduction. Hence, they selected rainy season as a best season. The young one of sheep, goats, then dogs, cats, they survive only under dry and cold weather. Therefore, they select winter season as the best season for the reproduction. But recently, for the human welfare, we induced some hormones for the birds. As a result, although birds are seasonal breeders, only they lay egg during summer, but now we make them as a continuous breeder by injecting certain hormones. Like that, commercially we can get egg, the seasonal breeder modified into a continuous breeder by inducing certain hormones which are responsible for production of egg continuously. Then there are different types of reproductive cycles exhibit in case of animals. In that, two important cycles are, one is menstrual cycle and another one is stress cycle. If you take a menstrual cycle, generally it is seen in case of primates like man, monkey, apes. But stress cycle we seen in case of non-mammalian primates only once again, like the dog, goat, sheep, then tiger. They shows stress cycle. Then the especially menstrual cycle is continuous it is, whereas the stress cycle is seasonal. During menstrual cycle, generally there is a menstrual discharge is there, that process what we call the name bleeding. But during stress cycle, there is no bleeding at all. Then the menstrual cycle we can differentiate into three phases. One is bleeding phase, ovulation phase, then post-ovulative phase. Whereas the estrus cycle shows pro-estrus, estrus and meta-estrus, like the three phases. Then during menstrual cycle, the female individual receptive for male partner in all phases, but here only the especially estrus period shows receptive for male partner. Like that, the specially animal shows a specialized type of reproductive cycle during their reproduction process. Then, based on the capability, the animals we can group into two types. One is continuous breeders, another one discontinuous breeder, seasonal breeders, seasonal breeders. Those animals shows reproduction continuously throughout year, we call continuous breeder. For example, you take human beings and most of the primates, they reproduce in all season. They are called a continuous breeder. Seasonal breeders are one, only they reproduce under particular period of a year under favorable condition, that we call seasonal breeder. As I mentioned earlier, bird shows summer season is the best reproductive season. Then amphibians and fishes and other aquatic animals, rainy season. Sheep, goat, tiger, lion and cattle shows a winter as a best season for the reproduction. The last phase of life cycle is aging. During aging, deterioration of cell is take place. That means disintegration of cells is take place, or in other words, death of cell is take place. And there is a impairment in the physiological activities of the organisms. Suppose you take animals and human beings, most of the physiological systems will be impaired. Heartbeat rate may increases or decreases, or there may be a decrease in the immunity in case of body, and breathing rate may be impaired, and the body become more sensitive for all diseases. These are the all character. Even there is an impairment in basal metabolic rate. Whereas in case of plants, what happens? Flowering and formation of seeds and fruit will be stopped, and shedding of leaves will take place. Photosynthetic ability will be reduced, and finally the organism leads into death. That is the end of life cycle.